So this might sound weird, but I think that one of the worst things that can happen to a skinny fat guy is that he successfully loses the weight. Because obviously, if you have fat that you don't like, the first thing that you think is, okay, I should probably lose the weight. That makes sense. And that's what everyone tells you to do. That's what I thought too. You look in the mirror, you don't like how your stomach looks, your waist feels kind of soft, you don't really have the shape you want, and the obvious answer feels like, all right, I just need to cut. So you drop the calories, scale starts going down, your waist gets a little bit smaller, shirts start to fit a little bit better. And for a few weeks, you're like, okay, this is working. I'm finally doing the right thing. But then eventually you get to a point where you thought you were going to look lean, and it's kind of disappointing because you don't really have that aesthetic look. You don't really have much muscle. You don't quite look like the version of the Hollywood physique you had imagined before you started the cut. You kind of just look smaller and flatter, and somehow you still look kind of soft. And I get how that feels, and that's the part that messes with most people because technically you succeeded. You lost the weight, you went through a successful cut. The scale went down, you dropped the 10 to 20 pounds. You followed the diet, but the result still doesn't feel like what you had imagined. And that is basically what's called the skinny fat trap. And the reason that most skinny fat guys are failing isn't because they aren't cutting the 15 pounds. They're failing because they're trying to reveal a body that they have not yet built. And that was literally the mistake that I made. When I started, I was about 170 pounds with quite the skinny fat look. I had started bulking, but after a little while, I kind of got scared with how I was looking. I was gaining a bit too much fat. Granted, my bulk wasn't structured very well because it was my first time. And so I ended up just cutting back down to even lighter than when I started. I was probably in the high 160s maybe. And I just ended up building from there. Although I didn't really look that great because I didn't have much muscle yet. So I kept doing this kind of weird thing where I'd cut for a little bit, feel a bit small, not really happy with how I looked. And then I try to eat more, feel a bit softer, get nervous again. Then I'd go back to maintenance because that was kind of what felt like my safe haven. I wasn't really changing how I looked. What I wish I knew at the time was that the actual problem wasn't that I had too much body fat. So as you saw in that picture, I had a little bit of love handle and a bit of chest fat. So I thought, I need to lose fat. But the actual problem was that I didn't have enough muscle yet. It wasn't that I had some crazy amount of fat to lose or that my body fat percentage even was that high. Probably wasn't. It's just that I barely had any muscle underneath it to make the cut actually worth it. And once that clicked, that's when the whole skinny fat thing started to make more sense. If you're someone who's skinny fat right now, the question shouldn't be, how do I lose fat as fast as possible? The better question is, do I even have enough muscle right now to make a cut look good? And so that's what I want to talk about in this video. I want to explain exactly how I'd think about it if I was starting over, and then give you guys an exact protocol that you can use to get rid of this as fast as possible. So basically, the way that I see it now is that the goal is not to become the lightest version of yourself. Stop worrying so much about body weight. Use it as a tool to gauge your current situation, but don't hyper focus on it. The goal is to build a body that looks good, not one that weighs a certain amount. Those two are not the same thing. Now, the reason why being skinny fat is so frustrating is because you're kind of in this weird middle ground where no option feels like the obviously right choice. You think, okay, I'm under muscled and I have too much fat, so I can either cut or I can bulk. Bulking will just make me look fatter, cutting will just make me look smaller. Which one should you do? It's not like someone who's clearly overweight where the solution's pretty simple. They just have to lose fat. Or for someone who's already lean and building some muscle, they just keep building, they keep bulking. But when you're skinny fat, you feel like both answers are kind of wrong and kind of right at the same time. With clothes on, maybe you look normal. You might even look skinny. People will probably ask you why you're trying to lose fat. They'll say that you look good already, that you're skinny. But they're not seeing what you see when the shirt comes off. You see the flat chest, the narrow shoulders, the arms that don't really fill out your sleeves, the lack of back width, and that soft waist that makes everything look worse. So you're sitting there thinking, I'm too soft to bulk, but I'm also too small to cut. And maintaining doesn't feel great either, because maintaining feels like you're just accepting the body you already have, which you don't like. That's why so many guys just keep bouncing around. They'll cut for a few weeks because they want the stomach fat off, but then they start looking smaller and they're like, okay, this is not what I wanted. Then they try to bulk because they know they need muscle, but then the second their stomach looks even a little softer, they start to panic and they think they're getting fat. And then they just end up going back to maintenance because it feels like the least scary option. And on paper, they call this recompositioning because recompositioning sounds productive. It sounds like a plan. But then months go by and they look basically the same. They've watched 100 videos, changed their calories a bunch of times, switched programs, maybe changed exercises, and somehow they're still asking the same question. Should I bulk or cut? The reason this happens is because skinny fat guys are quite obviously misdiagnosing the problem. They think that skinny fat is a too much fat problem, when a lot of the time, or I think the majority of the time, if you are actually skinny fat, it is a not enough muscle problem that makes a pretty normal amount of fat look a lot worse than it actually should. And that's a huge distinction, because if you think the main issue is fat, cutting feels like the obvious move. But if the real issue is that you don't have enough muscle, then cutting is taking you further away in the wrong direction. And I know that can sound a little bit counterintuitive, because losing fat should make you look better. That's what everyone thinks. Losing fat makes you look better. But fat loss only reveals what's already there. If there isn't much muscle underneath, there just isn't much for the cut to reveal. So before you even ask yourself, should I cut or bulk? I think the better question would be, if I lost 10 to 15 pounds right now of pure fat, what would I actually reveal? Like, be honest with yourself. Would you reveal a lean, athletic body with defined shoulders, chest, arms, a good back taper? Or would you just reveal a smaller version of the same body you're already frustrated with? Because if the honest answer is just, yeah, I'd probably look smaller, which if you are skinny fat is probably going to be the answer, then another cut isn't the solution you're hoping it is. And that's why cutting first backfires 99% of the time. That's why it backfired with me. I completely understand why people recommend it. The logic is very sound. You have fat you don't like, so you lose the fat first, then build the muscle after. And for some people, sure, that can work. I think it just takes longer, but of course it can work. Now, if you're genuinely overweight, you probably should cut. I'm not even saying every skinny fat guy needs to bulk no matter what, but a lot of skinny fat guys are already kind of light. Like, that's the whole paradox. You're fat, but also light at the same time. Like, imagine a guy who's 5'9" and in the mid 150s. He looks soft, so he thinks he needs to cut. But that same height and weight can look completely different depending on how much muscle you have. A muscular 5'9" guy who's been training for 2 to 3 years effectively can look very lean in the mid 150s. Whereas the skinny fat guy in the mid 150s at 5'9" will look completely underdeveloped with a bunch of body fat. The difference is simply body composition. Muscle changes how fat looks on the body. The more muscle that you have, the larger the surface area you're creating underneath for the body fat to spread. So it will look like there's visibly less on your body. So if that guy cuts from the mid 150s down to the 140s or 130s, which is just insane to say at that height, sure, he'll lose the fat. Yeah, his waist will shrink. His face will get leaner. He might get addicted to the scale going down, as many people do. But then when he looks in the mirror, he's going to actually have to be honest with himself and ask what he actually revealed, because it's probably just going to be a smaller body with the same lack of shape that he had in the 150s. So he just ended up wasting 2 to 3 months cutting with nothing to show for it. And that's why a lot of skinny fat guys get so disappointed and demoralized after cutting, because they did the thing that they thought they were supposed to do, but then they didn't get the result that they thought they were going to get. Now, the middle ground here is the recomp, as I already talked about. And I don't want to act like the recomp is completely useless, because it's not. Recomping can definitely work in certain situations. Like if you're a complete beginner and you're super sensitive to the stimulus of muscle growth, or if you're coming back from some time off and you're utilizing muscle memory, or even if you've been in the gym for a while, but your training has always been bad, and then you finally get on a good program and training properly, which would basically just make you a beginner as well. In those three scenarios, recomping can work. Or also if you have a crap ton of body fat on your body because you basically just pre-bulk there and you have all of the additional resources to build muscle. So in those situations, you can build some muscle and lose some fat at the same time. Your lifts will go up and your body weight can stay around the same. So I'm not completely against recomp. However, it has to be in those three circumstances. It can be a good starting point for a little while as a beginner, but it has a very short shelf life. The problem is that recomping is sold by the fitness industry kind of as this perfect scenario where you get the best of both worlds. You get to build the muscle and lose the fat without having to waste time going in either direction. So what happens is even if you get a little bit of results as a beginner recomping in the first few months, most of them try to do it for way too long or a lot longer than they actually could, because once you've milked out those first 3 months of progress recomping, you're going to get diminished returns, especially if you don't have the additional energy in terms of body fat to facilitate muscle growth. That's basically what happened to me, because I was getting some gains at the beginning doing the recomp, but then after a while, months were kind of just passing and I wasn't really changing. My body weight was staying the same. The problem was that I wasn't tracking my lifts at the time. I wasn't really aware that that was something I should have been doing. I was kind of just lifting intuitively. And that was the big mistake. It's not that the recomp was necessarily the problem. I just didn't realize that it wasn't working anymore. So my recommendation is, if you want to start with a recomp, go ahead. Make sure though that you are meticulously tracking your progression on all of your lifts mainly, and looking in the mirror to see if you're progressing. And as soon as that stops, like if you haven't made progress at all on any lift within 2 to 3 weeks and you're in the first 3 months of lifting, then it's time to change something. The recomp is not working anymore. You should not be stalling for that long in your first 3 months of training. So that would be my advice for recomp. I'm not going to be one of those guys that just say, screw recomping, it never works, don't do it, only bulk or only cut. If it's working, seriously, keep doing it. If your lifts are going up, you're getting a bit leaner, you're building a bit of muscle, your photos look better, and your body weight is kind of stable, that's great. Don't force the bulk just because I told you to do so, even though that's what I'm about to tell you. Keep doing the recomp, but meticulously track and make sure that it's actually working. Be honest with yourself when it stops working. I know it can be kind of an uncomfortable decision to have to switch to a bulk and gain some body fat when you thought you were getting the best of both worlds and you thought it was going to last forever. But it's worse to waste a bunch of time doing something that's not working. So take that from someone who's been through it and knows how it feels. So let's say you've been at maintenance for a few months now and everything's kind of plateaued. You're not really progressing in strength. You're looking the same in the mirror and you're being honest with yourself. It's time to go on a proper dedicated gaining phase. There are a lot of circumstances where if the bulk is structured correctly and their training program is dialed in and their training intensity is actually dialed in, a lot of the times they gain weight and look better. They look leaner after gaining weight. And it's not because they magically just gain zero fat while eating in a surplus. It's because, first of all, the muscle they built changed the whole body composition. And two, the rate of muscle gain as a beginner when training is effective and the surplus is structured correctly can outpace the rate of fat gain. So you're simultaneously getting the effect of more muscle, less fat, or building muscle faster than gaining fat, and changing the body composition by increasing the total amount of muscle from basically none at the start to maybe 10 to 15 pounds more at the end of a long dedicated bulk, even with the additional body fat, will still make you look leaner and just better in general. And that's what I personally wish that I understood earlier, because I was always fearmongered into thinking that a bulk just automatically means you're getting fatter and you're looking worse. There's a lot of guys in the fitness industry, pretty big channels that do a lot of this fear mongering, and it's what keeps a lot of people stuck, I think. And sure, a dirty, lazy bulk will just get you fat if you're eating garbage food and your total surplus amount is way out of control. But if you properly control your surplus, combine it with hard structured training, you're just going to feel like you're on steroids. You're not just eating those extra calories for no reason. They actually have a purpose. They're supporting your training, recovery, and muscle growth. They're not just there to make you gain weight for no reason. This is what people don't understand. And so if you think about it that way, then the bulk will feel a little bit less scary if you're one of those people who thinks you're just going to gain a bunch of body fat. So instead of just thinking you're just gaining weight and body fat, shift your perspective to, I'm building the muscle that is then going to make the future cut actually look good. Now, the very important part is that the bulk only works if your training is good enough to actually utilize the extra food. This is where you should actually be worried, because people hear bulk first and they think, okay, I'll just eat more and gain weight. But a calorie surplus isn't magical. It can feel magical if done correctly, but I'd like to look at it more of an opportunity. Your training determines what you do with that opportunity. If you have a terrible program, your training is lazy, you're constantly switching exercises, and your technique is poor, you're not training with enough intensity, all the things that make bad training that most beginners do, then the surplus is probably going to make you gain mostly fat with little to no muscle to show for it. But if your training is structured correctly, you are intentionally forcing progression, it's intense enough with good technique, and you're actually stimulating muscle growth while simultaneously recovering well, then that surplus becomes fuel for adaptation. So yes, bulking by itself does not fix skinny fat, unless you deem fixing skinny fat by becoming just normal fat. Bulking with effective training fixes skinny fat. The most important thing that I'll say is the scale should not be the only thing moving. Your lifts should be moving up with it and faster than it. So let's say you're benching 100 pounds for 8 reps your first time in the gym, first week in the gym, whatever. And then 3 months from now, you've gained 10 pounds, but you're still benching that same 100 pounds for 8 reps. That's probably not a great sign. But if your body weight is slowly going up and your bench is moving from 100 to 115, 135, your rows are getting stronger, your presses are getting stronger, your pull-ups are improving, all of your compound movements are going up, then that means the extra food is probably doing something. And you're probably going to notice this in the mirror as well. I'm not saying it has to be perfect. Like, you're not going to add weight every single workout forever. That's impossible, or we'd all be benching 1,000, 2,000 pounds by now. But over time, there should be consistent evidence that the surplus is helping you train harder and recover better. If your body weight is going up, but your strength is not improving, that is feedback that you're doing something wrong. Something needs to change, whether it be your technique is poor, you're not training to failure or with nearly enough intensity to stimulate muscle growth. Maybe you're not doing enough volume. Maybe you're doing too much volume. Maybe your program is very poorly designed and you're not recovering in time for the next session. It could be so many different factors. Essentially, the surplus gives your body the resources. Training gives those resources direction. So let's say you're watching this video and you're thinking, okay, I'm definitely what Mateo's describing as skinny fat. I'm probably not overweight. I'm just under-muscled, and cutting would probably make me look smaller, not better. What do you actually do? So I'll use my case as an example. When I started lifting, I was about 170, 175 pounds. I'll put up a picture if I can here. You'll probably see I have a little bit of love handle, a little bit of chest fat. I have a little bit of muscle too. I'm not like super underdeveloped, but I have a lot of muscle to gain. In that first year, I gained about 30 pounds. I went from 175 to around 205. And looking back, I probably didn't need to gain that much weight on the first push. It was fun to do because it was my first big bulk and I had all my newbie gains. And so I really did make sure that I milked all of them. But maybe 30 pounds was a little bit excessive. Like, it wasn't necessary. I probably gained a little bit of extra fat, but I made sure that I built the muscle. And I always say that the fat comes off easy after, especially if you're someone who started off skinny and you have a smaller appetite, you're going to be able to cut very easily. So I'm not saying it was all bad because, like I said, I needed to build. But if I was doing it again, or if I was helping or coaching someone who was skinny fat and relatively light for their height, I'd probably start with a very controlled 10 to 15 pound lean bulk and then adjust from there. Just because I think that's a sweet spot to create a significant change without, turning the whole thing into one of those big dirty bulk phases. I kind of did that. I'll be honest, it was a bit of a dirty bulk. But like I said, I got the gains. At least my training was very good. So I was running a very effective program. I built the muscle with it. But yeah, the first thing I would do is just make sure we're actually diagnosing the problem correctly. Like, are you actually overweight? Are you actually underweight? Or are you actually skinny fat? Like, we need to understand if the problem is actually a too much body fat problem or a too little muscle problem. But obviously, for the argument I'm making here, it's that it's usually a under muscle problem, or for people suffering from an under muscle problem who think it's a too much fat problem. So the very first thing after understanding that, okay, we need to gain muscle, not lose fat, is I'd start them off at maintenance calories as a starting point. And I would milk that as long as possible. As I already said, it's probably going to last only a few months, but I would meticulously track so that once it's over, it's over. Just look at it as a honeymoon phase. Once it's done, you're never going to get it back. It's time to start actually focusing on the things that move the needle. So let's say 3 months go by. That's when the stall happens. I would immediately introduce a calorie surplus, a very small 300 to 500 calories above maintenance, which is just enough to support growth, but not so much that you just start eating like an idiot and then blame bulking as the reason why you got fat. I'd very meticulously monitor the rate of gain. So for most skinny fat beginners, I'd aim for around 0.25 to 0.5% of body weight gained per week. So if you're 160 pounds, you're probably looking at around a half a pound per week, maybe a little bit more depending on the situation. Now, again, these are just, I know that might sound a bit scary. I'm being very hyper specific with the numbers, and you're probably thinking, how do I even track that? You don't need to force the scale up aggressively. The goal is not to gain weight as fast as possible. And you don't also have to be perfect every week. You can gain maybe 1 pound 1 week and then the next week slow it down. You can always auto regulate as you go. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just saying on average, by the end of the bulk, you want to have kind of mimic that rate of gain. So let's say a pound a week over the course of 3 months, that's probably going to be way too much body fat, right? So we want to look at about 0.5 pounds per week, just as a gauge for the length of the period of time that we're going to be gaining the 10 to 15 pounds. The goal is to gain slowly enough that your performance improves while your waist and your body fat stays reasonably under control. And I would track the things that actually matter, not just one random weigh-in after you went to all-you-can-eat sushi and you gained 5 to 10 pounds of glycogen and water weight. I would track your body weight average, track your waist, take progress photos, and track your lifts. One bloated morning doesn't mean anything. If your strength is going up, your body weight is steadily rising, your waist is staying under control, and your photos are slowly improving, then you're probably doing fine. If your weight is flying up, your waist is exploding, and your lifts are barely moving, slow down, reduce the calories. That doesn't mean bulking is bad. It just means that you're doing it poorly. And the last thing I'd say is give it enough time. And this is probably the hardest part. We're so trained to have instant gratification nowadays. Most people overestimate what they can achieve in a very short amount of time, but underestimate what they can achieve in a very long period of time. Let's say after 3 months, they think they're going to look like Ronnie Coleman. And then when they don't, they think they're never going to get anywhere. But had they just stuck with it for another year or two, they would have looked pretty damn good. So sure, it might be 6 months, might be 8 months, might be closer to a year, even 2. It all depends on your starting point, how well you execute, how consistent you are, even genetics to a certain degree, of course. But none of that means that you just blindly bulk forever, right? It just means you give yourself enough runway to actually make significant change while constantly checking the data to make sure that everything's going smoothly. And like I said, your most important levers are going to be your average weekly body weights, your waist measurements, your muscle measurements as well. You can do arms, torso, legs, everything. Progress photos, and most importantly, your strength numbers. Those are your most important feedback tools. And once you actually build that first significant layer of muscle, that first 10 to 15 pounds, that's when everything changes. Because the whole point of that first bulk is not just to, gain as much weight as possible, or even become Ronnie Coleman. But the point is just to build enough muscle so that your next decision actually makes sense. Like after a real growth phase, essentially you have 2 options. If you're still getting stronger, your body fat is under control, your waist is under control, and you're really enjoying how things are going, you can just keep building. Even if you know you're at a point where you may cut down and look really good because you've built that base of muscle. Of course, you can do that too. If you want to cut, you can just cut and reveal the gains. But you can also just keep bulking. You can just keep going, gain even more muscle, and look even better the next time you cut. But in either way, you're in a way better position than you were when you were initially skinny fat. Because whereas when you were skinny fat, it felt like both options were kind of wrong and kind of right at the same time. Now you have 2 options that are both extremely right, which may paradoxically make it harder to choose, but either one you choose, you're going to get a good reward. So you can either cut down, enjoy the gains for a while, and then bulk later on, or you can continue bulking and then enjoy the shreds later on. Either way, now that you've built that first 10 to 15 pounds, you're basically set for the rest of your life. You'll never have that skinny fat look again. You can always now decide whether you want to keep building or just cut down and get lean. And that changes the whole experience, because before the cut was just making you look smaller and disappointed after. But now the cut is actually rewarding because it's actually revealing something that you built and you're actually happy with how you look. Your shoulders look rounded. Your chest has way more shape. Your back has a way better V taper. Your arms have veins in them. Your legs have striations, depending on how far you cut, but you don't have to cut that far to look good. Essentially, the same fat loss that used to make you look depleted, worse, and disappointed now makes you finally have that aesthetic look that you always desired, because there's finally something underneath it. That's why building first or bulking first may feel like the wrong thing to do, and it feels like you're going in the wrong direction because it's slow and you're gaining fat when your real goal is to look aesthetic and lean. But in the long run, it's actually the smarter decision, and it saves you the most amount of time. You stop cutting for 2 to 3 months to just look worse, and then bulk a little bit, get scared, cut back down, recomp for another 3 months, waste a bunch of time, and then years go by and you haven't changed. Or you just accept that the bulk is what's going to make you build the muscle that you actually need, then cut down after, or keep bulking and build more muscle. Put you in a position where you have leverage, and either choice that you make is going to have a reward. So if I had to make things really simple, I'd put it like this. If you're genuinely overweight, cut. Don't overcomplicate it. You're still going to gain muscle in the cut. But if you're relatively light for your height, your lifts are still low, your frame is very underdeveloped, and you still look soft, you probably need muscle a lot more than you need another fat loss phase. Ask yourself what the cut would actually reveal. If losing 10 to 15 pounds would reveal a leaner, more aesthetic body, then go ahead, cut. But if it would just reveal a smaller version of the same body, stop cutting into nothing. Recomp if it's actually working. If you're new and your lifts are going up, your waist is coming down, and your photos are improving, great. But don't hide at maintenance forever because you're afraid to bulk or cut. Once you plateau and the gains are no longer coming, it's time to accept a bulk. If you do a bulk, keep it controlled. Start with something like a 300 to 500 calories above maintenance. Aim for the first 10 to 15 pounds. Track your body weight daily. Take a weekly average. Take measurements of your waist, arms, shoulders, chest, legs, progress photos, and most importantly, track your lifts and actually train hard enough to make the surplus useful. And then just give it time. Not 2 weeks, not a month, a real growth phase, long enough for your body to actually look different. This will typically take at least 6 months to a year. That's really the whole thing. It's not complicated, but it can be difficult. And I get it, because that was me. Because I think the biggest issue for most skinny fat guys is not that they don't understand the basics. I think it's that they're just scared. They're either scared of getting fatter or scared of cutting and looking smaller. So ultimately, they're just scared of choosing the wrong path and making the wrong decision. And I totally get that, because I was in the exact same situation. So if you're skinny fat, your first priority shouldn't be getting smaller. It should be building the body that makes fat loss worth doing. Fat loss matters, obviously, but fat loss only reveals what's underneath. And if there isn't any muscle underneath, you're probably going to be disappointed by what the cut reveals. So build the muscle first, utilize a controlled surplus, train with a real progression system, track your lifts, body weight, waist, and photos, and gain slowly enough that your performance improves without your body fat getting out of control. Then decide what comes next. Maybe you either keep building because things are going well, or you cut back down because it's summertime and you actually have enough muscle to look good. But the main idea is that you can't cut your way out of a physique that you haven't built yet. And in a lot of cases, you're probably not as far away as you think. Like we always, like I said, overestimate what we can do in 2 to 3 months, but underestimate what we can do in a year or two. If you can just have some patience and delayed gratification, I promise you're going to be very impressed with what you can do within that amount of time with dedicated training and bulking. Not from your final physique, sure, or from being, shredded or perfect, but just from looking completely different than you do now, and in a way that you can actually be proud of how you look. Different enough that the old skinny fat problems don't define your body anymore. You're going to be a completely different person. And that's the goal. If you're struggling to find a program that actually suits your schedule and removes all the guesswork, allowing you to progress automatically, you can check out my program in the description, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.